I guess we can get this started over here. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and welcome to Great River Shakespeare Festival Season 14. So thank you so much for being part of this season, and thank you for coming to see The Comedy of Errors. My name is Gaby Rodriguez, and I am the assistant director of the show. And before I start, and I give you a couple of fun facts about the show, I want to know how many people here have seen The Comedy of Errors before? Great, well that's a big crowd, great. How many people have read the show before? Great, well I don't have a lot of explaining to do. No, I'm kidding. But The Comedy of Errors was the first Shakespeare show that I read. And I grew up in Cuba, so English is my second language, and I read The Comedy of Errors 4 years ago, when I spoke very little English, and I loved it because I didn't need to know any Shakespeare to understand anything about it. Like, I understood what the whole show was about just by reading through it and just by looking at the page, because it's such a fun show and it's such an easy show to understand. And that is because Shakespeare uses a style and a story that is already familiar to us, whether we know it or not. Because The Comedy of Errors was one of Shakespeare's earliest shows, and he actually, like a very good student, borrows from one of Plautus's plays, the Menechmi. Now, the Menechmi tells the story of a set of twins that get separated at birth and then come back together, are reunited after a series of crazy misunderstandings. Shakespeare, to be a little clever, said, "What can I do to make this better? All right, let me add a second set of twins to the story." And that was basically what he did to create The Comedy of Errors. He added a second pair of twins to one of the classic Roman plays. And so The Comedy of Errors has a physicality to it and has a rhythm to the show that will allow you to understand the show at all times. And actually, you will even be one step ahead of the characters on stage, because once they come out, all they're looking for is to get your attention at all times, which is fantastic. So unless you were coming in to see blood and drama, you're in for a treat. But if you do want to see the blood and the drama, come see Richard III later, because they have it all. Or come see Henry VI next week, because they have all the fighting, the blood, and the drama. It's intense. But I don't want to spoil anything of the show for you, but I do have a couple of fun facts. So the first one is how The Comedy of Errors was created. Basically, Shakespeare wrote The Comedy of Errors for this group of lawyers who were getting together at this inn in London to celebrate the end of the year and Christmas and all that stuff. So December 28, 1593, Shakespeare was scheduled to premiere The Comedy of Errors at this inn in London. However, his troupe showed up so late that everybody was drunk and the set had been taken all apart. And what happened? Well, the Queen decided that she wanted a last-minute performance from Shakespeare's troupe, and when the Queen wants a last-minute performance, we give the Queen a last-minute performance. So they went and they performed for the Queen, and then they had to race across London to try to make it in time to the inn, but they didn't, and they arrived extremely late, and the night went down in history as the Night of Errors. And that was the first time that The Comedy of Errors was performed. But do not worry, that's not going to happen today. The actors already had their half-hour called, so they're already getting ready for you. They don't have a queen that wants them to perform. But that just tells you the craziness of The Comedy of Errors that started back when the show was created. And the reason why it's such a fun show is because it is a farce. And a farce is a comedic dramatic piece that places highly one-dimensional characters in extravagant and extreme situations. And one-dimensional characters, their actions have absolutely no consequence. So think about cartoons like Tom and Jerry and the Roadrunner, where, you know, they walk into a wall at one moment, and then the second moment they're fine and they're running around like nothing happened. Those are exactly the type of characters that The Comedy of Errors has. They can be hit in the head at one moment, and then the next one they're fine, and everything is fine. So that's the type of fun that The Comedy of Errors has. And to prove to you that you are familiar with this style, I have a question for you. So one-dimensional characters are basically stock characters, and we encounter those in our everyday lives whether we know it or not. And for example, if you watch a movie and you see the villain, they have similar characteristics. All villains have similar characteristics. All superheroes have similar characteristics. So if I ask you, what comes to your head when you think of an evil villain? What comes to your head? What type of characteristic comes to your head? Evil laugh. The mustache, the evil laugh, the cape. Yeah, the rolling the mustache. Yeah, that's great. What if I say like a superhero, like Superman? What comes to your head? The cape, the big muscles, the charming smile, the fun characteristics. And if I say clowns, what comes to your head if I say clown? The big feet, the big shoes, the nose, the makeup, all of those characteristics will be on stage today, especially the clowns, because our two Dromios, played by Tara Flanagan, who you might have seen as Rosalind in As You Like It last year, and Caroline Amos, who you might have seen as Juliet in Romeo and Juliet a couple of years ago. They play our two Dromios, and they are clowns. They've been rehearsing with this 12-inch giant shoes that you'll see them wear on stage today. And they have special hats that they do tricks with, and it fits perfectly into the Comedy of Errors. And the Comedy of Errors is also one of two times that Shakespeare uses Aristotle's unities. And basically the unities is this great philosopher named Aristotle came up with a plan that in order for a play to be great, it needed to follow three unities. Unity of time, which means that the whole play takes place in under 24 hours. Unity of place, which means that the play happens in one setting. And unity of action, which means that every single little plot feeds into the main plot of the story. In the case of the Comedy of Errors, the whole play takes place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And it takes place in one street, and every single little thing that happened feeds into the main plot, which is the twins. And the only other time that Shakespeare uses this is in one of his very last shows, The Tempest. Now, I have no idea what this means, but I thought this was the coolest fun fact because you see him using it at the beginning of his career and then at the end of his career. So it's to show you that the Comedy of Errors is the work of a student who quickly learned all the theater rules and quickly learned how to break them, which is fantastic, and that's what made him such a genius. But there's one thing about our Comedy of Errors that makes it special from any other Comedy of Errors, and is the fact that it takes place in the 1920s. Our director, Melissa Rain Anderson, decided to place it there because the 1920s is a time of partying, a time of happiness, a time of color, economy is blooming, everybody's partying, and everybody's drinking a lot. Because even though Prohibition just started, levels of alcohol actually increased in the country. So you'll see a little bit of that today in the characters. They show a little bit of that time period when everybody's just really happy and everybody's doing, but there's also a lot of tension underneath it, which fits into the plot of the Comedy of Errors too. But we also have music. Because of the 1920s was such an influential time for music, especially jazz, we have our own Comedy of Errors band, and they're called Queen Mab and the Libertines of Sin. And they will be playing a pre-show repertoire for you in a couple of minutes. They'll be playing, and you should go in, make sure you go in and you catch them after you leave this. They were playing some songs like By Mere, Witchcraft, and Fever, and they're awesome. But yeah, basically, the Comedy of Errors is a really fun show, and you will understand that at all times. Trust me, and you will laugh, and you will have a great time. And before I send you off, do you have any questions that you would like for me to answer about the show or about the rehearsal process? Mm-hmm. The three unities, time, place, and action. Yes, and all of this information is in your primer that you have if you want to read it later. And there's a lot of it. What I just said is explained there. So yeah. Well, great. I'll stick around here, so if you want to come and talk to me or want to ask me any questions about the show, feel free. I love to talk about it. But basically, there's only two things that you need to know before you go in and see the Comedy of Errors. And number one is that we are in a town in Long Island called Ephesus in the 1920s. And number two, that there is only one rule in this little town. And that is that if anybody from Syracuse come to the Bay of Ephesus, they are condemned to die. Unless 1,000 marks, which is equivalent to $500,000, is paid to quit that penalty. Everything else will be there for you, and a merchant named Aegeon will take you through everything you need to know in the first scene of the show. So relax, enjoy the show, and have fun. Because although the Comedy of Errors is a crazy, fun show, it's also a show about family and a show about community. And to do this show in a community like Winona and in a place like Great River Shakespeare, it's so special. So thank you so much for joining me here today, and I hope you enjoy the show as much as I enjoy working on it. Thank you so much.